Before we get started with this episode, I have a few requests. Download the Talk Music Talk app. It is free for iPhone and Android, wherever you get your apps, or you can subscribe on iTunes or Google Play. Once you do, just leave a rating and or review in the store to help spread the word about the podcast. Second, share this episode on social media if you enjoy it. Facebook, Twitter, however you like to do it. It will help spread the word about the podcast. And finally, I am in the process of acquiring advertisers and sponsors, and I need your help. Just take a quick survey on my website at talkmusictalk.com/survey. Should take you 30 seconds or less, and it will be greatly appreciated. And now for today's show. Hello there, my friend. Welcome to another episode of Talk Music Talk with Boice. I am Boice, and this is my podcast. You are listening to episode 106. If you have not heard the podcast before, Talk Music Talk is a weekly music interview podcast where I have long-form discussions, conversations with people who are connected to music from different genres and backgrounds, singers and songwriters, music journalists, music therapists. And on episode 106, I had the pleasure of speaking to J. Edward Keys. Joe is the editorial director at Bandcamp. And if you have not heard of Bandcamp, it is a platform for music artists to sell music directly to listeners, which is pretty incredible. It offers music discovery for all genres, and there is also Bandcamp Daily, which is a site that features interviews and articles to assist with music discovery. As for Joe, personally, he has had an interesting background. Once upon a time, he wanted to be a youth pastor. His music journalism career began with Christian music magazines. So we talk about what led him to that path and what was the catalyst to him altering that direction eventually. We also talk about music that has had a profound effect on him, his life. We talk about his favorite albums of all time, his favorite music of 2016. We discuss his website, An Atheist Guide to Christian Rock. And we also talk about how nostalgia can be a detriment to listening to new music, that whole music discovery thing. This was one of my favorite conversations. It was a pleasure to talk to Joe. Very interesting guy. One of my favorite podcasts that I've done of all time. Here it is. Without further ado, my conversation with J. Edward Keys on Talk Music Talk. Enjoy. I know you went to Drexel, right?
I went to Drexel for grad school.
Okay. What'd you do? Where'd you go for undergrad?
So for undergrad, I actually went to what was at the time called Philadelphia Biblical University.
Okay.
It's now called Cairn University in Langhorne, Pennsylvania. I, at the time, was a pretty serious Christian, and I went to college with the intention of becoming a youth minister. Got through 5 years of Bible college and realized I'd made a huge mistake. So that's where I did my undergrad work.
Okay. See, I was leading towards the article you had on college radio stations. Was there a college radio station?
There was not.
Oh, okay.
It was pretty dire. I mean, I should preface this in fairness to Cairn University by saying this was 22 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's probably a completely different place now. But when I was there wasn't a whole lot of attention put on the arts or music in general because it was a very conservative Christian school, and there was a fear of anything that wasn't a cultural fear of anything that wasn't part of the Christian culture. So we weren't even supposed to listen to non-Christian music in college. Everyone I knew broke that rule, but it was in the books that you weren't supposed to. Yeah, that you weren't supposed to do that. I was in a band in college, and I remember after we played our first show, we definitely got taken aside and scolded for making music that was too much like quote unquote the world. So definitely no radio station.
So if it wasn't a Christian rock band, then it was pretty much.
And even if it was a Christian rock band, you were like right on the border. Yeah, it was. I mean, the people who I went to college with, you know, I always try to talk about this as fairly as possible, because I feel like it's so easy to just paint with a broad brush. Yeah. People who I went to school with, many of them I'm still friends with, and many of them are at different stages of belief. And they were honestly some of the nicest and greatest people, and I still value those friendships. But the culture in Christianity and Christian schools at that time was real weird. Yeah. Looking back on it now, I don't know how I made it. But it was instrumental in making me realize a lot of things about it and moving me out of Christianity and out of that whole belief system. But I was in
deep.
it. Yeah, I was deep undercover.
So was that like a family tradition, or you following
Not
along
even
those
really.
lines?
My family never put any kind of pressure on me. It was when I was in junior high school, like a lot of kids in junior high school, I was kind of beat up pretty mercilessly, and going to school was just a nightmare. Yeah. My parents had started going to this church, and the church had a youth group, and they convinced me to go. And I went one week, and it was this whole different situation of kids my age who actually liked me and like weren't going to beat me up. And I think that experience was so profound for me that I thought, well, everyone in junior high school hates me, but the church, everyone really likes me and is nice to me. So I'm just going to throw myself into this as hard as I possibly can. And that one thing just led to another at that point.
And were you listening to music? Like, what were you listening to?
All over the spectrum. When I was really young, like 13 or 14, 13 or 14, I was listening to really bad Christian rock. But and actually in a roundabout way, it got me into the music that I'm listening to now. When I discovered a record probably when I was 17 or 18 by a loosely Christian group called Daniel Amos. And the album was called Darn Floor Big Bite. And I remember putting that thing on, and it was just like nothing I'd ever heard before. It was experimental. It was post-punk. I just had no frame of reference for this music. I was listening to music that sounded like Journey. Yeah. And all of a sudden I put this thing on. I was like, what is this? And so that got me into this whole other subgenre of Christian music that wasn't really super explicit. It didn't sing about God or Jesus or anything. Just sang about life experiences. And then through there, I got into the Smiths, and I got into REM, and I got into bands that were indie and alternative at the time. And then when I was in college in the 90s, I was listening to Christian groups like the 77s at the same time as like Sebadoh and Yola Tango. Like it was all music to me across the board.
What makes it Christian music if it's not explicitly about God?
The people who made it kind of identify that way. And there are some songs where their faith does come into play a little bit. Like if you're paying attention, you can catch it. But a lot of like the worst kind of Christian music is so, it's musically lame and it's just all beats you over the head with these really cheesy lyrics. And these guys just sang about love or fear or death or happiness or, and when they did write about faith, it was in really intellectual, philosophical ways. It wasn't just like quoting the Bible. It was actually allowing room for doubt. And all that was so important to me when I was 17, 18, 19 years old. It wasn't just blindly accepting this thing. So I still hold a lot of those bands really close to my heart. But it was through that, it was totally backwards, because I was like, well, if there's Christian bands that don't sound terrible, there must be non-Christian bands that also don't sound terrible. So I did the reverse, and that's how I started getting into indie rock, and then all other genres from there.
And how were you initially? How were you finding the Christian rock you were listening to?
Oh man, it was so weird. So the youth group, they just had the tapes, and they play. It was like Petra was really big, Striper, and all those bands. But I just had this nagging sense at a certain point. I was like, there's got to be more music than this. So you'd have to buy those albums from Christian bookstores. You couldn't get them in regular record stores.
Zondervan? Was that one?
Yeah. They were like a major distributor,
I got my first Bible there.
Yeah, totally. And there was this one, I grew up on Long Island, and just one Christian bookstore in Sayville, town Sayville, that I went into, and I knew I wanted to buy a magazine to find out about new music, and the only one I could afford was this magazine called Noteboard. And I looked at the cover of it, and I was pretty deep into bad Christian music at this point. And I looked at the cover of this magazine, and I didn't recognize any of the names on it. And just instinctively, I was like, well, this is the one I want. Like, I want a magazine with like nothing I've ever heard of before. And that magazine is really what I just read page after page of this thing and discovered all these bands who weren't awful.
Okay. Would the Smiths have been in here? Or?
No.
Or is it just Christian bands?
The way I got into that, so I was just listening to a lot of Christian music, and then, you started watching MTV, and another big transformative moment for me was, this is like 1989, seeing a live video for REM, I Could Turn You Inside Out. Yeah. And for me at the time, being a guy who never could identify with a lot of the things that were being pushed as like maleness at the time, just like macho toughness, Motley Crue, girls. Yeah. Like just none of that resonated with me. And seeing Michael Stipe on stage, commanding an audience and being the exact opposite of all the things society dictated as like traditional male behavior, seeing somebody be able to do that was so powerful. And it's hard for me to talk about. I mean, REM is still my favorite band, and I know they have a lot of cultural baggage with people. And it's hard for me to explain that it's not just the songs. It was just like seeing somebody who was kind of gender fluid like Michael Stipe. That changed my life. It made me feel not as alone. Okay. And it was really important to me.
Oh, that's great, man. You know what album I love by there is that no one really talks about, Up?
Oh, yeah. That record's beautiful. Totally agree. Underrated.
And, so anyway, was the writing a part of, were you writing or anything like that?
So, when I got into college, I started doing a zine that was all Christian music. Okay. And from there, I got connected with one of the magazines I used to read growing up. It was a magazine out of Chicago called True Tunes. That was probably my first real writing gig, and was writing about Christian music for them. But man, I was such an arrogant 20-something-year-old, and I just thought, I'm going to go in and I'm going to just give them great writing. And the editor of that magazine, John J. Thompson, is one of like the 3 people who are the most responsible for shaping my writing career and for me being the way I am. I mean, I'd turn in my stories and he'd be like, I don't think so, man. And I was mad at the time, but thank God he did that. Like that he took that editing hand and reined me in. And so that's how I got started writing, was writing for those kinds of magazines.
Where did the arrogance come from with your writing? Because were you writing prior to the zine?
No. Okay. Man, I think a lot of it was big fish in a small pond, being in Bible college. Okay. And maybe being, at the time, to be clear, I was a terrible writer at the time. But at the time, maybe being the best writer in that college or amongst my peer groups. And you just get a swelled, I'm just prone to that. Yeah. It's something that I'm really try to be careful of now. And I just got a really swelled head. And I thought I was going to start writing for these Christian publications, and it was going to be, I knew all there was to know, and I'm going to show them how it's done. And man, I didn't at all. And I cringe when I think back on a lot of that now, and am thankful for people like John who took me down a peg when I really needed it.
So were you like kind of a big thing because you had a zine?
In a really tiny Christian community.
Big is relative. Big can be very relative.
I was the biggest mouse in Mouseville. No. Medium, maybe. Okay. I mean, people like John and people like an editor named Brian Quincy Newcomb, who did a magazine called Harvest Rock Syndicate, were infinitely better writers and infinitely more well-known than I was at the time. I think I just thought I was.
Okay. And so is there like this big Christian journalism magazine system that you can plug yourself into?
There used to be.
Okay.
There used to be all these in the late 80s and early 90s. There used to be tons of Christian music magazines because it was just like the music industry in general.
Yeah.
I mean, it was in the regular music industry, you could have Option and Puncture and all these different things, and you could just sustain it because there was a business there. And it's the same thing in Christian music. It's like True Tunes, Harvest Rock Syndicate were probably the biggest ones. Seven Ball was one for a little while, but you could have like 4 or 5 of those, and they'd be good. And then when the bottom fell out, like it did with the music industry in general, I don't think any of them are around anymore at all.
So that was sort of your path, was going to be a Christian music journalist?
I was going to be a youth pastor, and I was just doing the writing on the side, and then I realized that I really liked it. But it was kind of from there, after I was writing for all those places, by that point I was fully into regular music of all kinds, and I just thought, I like doing this. I mean, I like all music. Why am I just doing it for these publications? So I got an internship at the Philadelphia Weekly. And worked again with 2 great editors, Holly McWard and Alyssa Ludwig, who, again, just so responsible for giving me perspective and toning down some of that brashness that I had. And then once I started contributing to the Philadelphia Weekly regularly, I went from there to the Philadelphia Inquirer, to a magazine called Magnet, which is still based in Philadelphia. And then one thing just kind of led to another. Like once you start getting those clips together, and if you can push yourself a little bit, you end up, and not just that. I mean, you also get to know people. I mean, so much of it is that as well. And so, writing for those places eventually led to me writing for Entertainment Weekly, Village Voice, Rolling Stone, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. But my very first music writing was in Christian magazines, which, thank God, are not on the internet or anywhere to be found. Some of the worst writing you'll ever read. Yeah.
You ever go back to that stuff?
I did. One of the things that is out there, there's a group called Starflyer 59 that I still love, and was friends with. And they put out a box set and asked me to write the liner notes. Oof.
That's forever.
Oof. At the time, again, I just thought, oh man, I'm crushing it.
Yeah.
But I was just weeding out my CDs the other night and started thumbing through that book again. And I was like, man, if anyone turned this into me, my head would explode. It's so bad.
God. So where was I know you have the ending of not wanting to be a youth pastor. Like, how do you realize you don't want to be a youth pastor?
It happened. I was sitting in the back of, I had to take a science elective my last year of college, and it was an earth science class. And I remember distinctly where I was sitting in the room, the color, like everything about it. And this is like 20 years ago. And I remember the teacher of that class teaching with a straight face that the earth was only 5,000 years old. Okay. And that there was no such thing as evolution, and man and dinosaurs coexisted, and Noah's Ark was a real thing. Okay. And I honestly just remember thinking, I've got to get out of here. Yeah. This is insane. I can't, like, it just struck me in that moment how crazy it was. And so from there, it was just kind of the gradually moving on from that. And moving towards agnosticism and atheism. And I'd say that now I'm at a place in my life where I have kind of a uncomfortable peace with faith and with the idea of faith. I've started going to a super lefty, fantastic, progressive church, but I don't buy into a lot of, it's far from what you might call Christianity.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you're preparing your life to be a youth pastor and then you decide not to, is that like shake your whole world?
It was more like a sigh of relief.
Okay.
Because I spent so long, I'm reading a great book right now which deals with this also. It's called Finding God in the Waves. And he describes a similar thing, the author. I had spent so long trying to force Christianity to reconcile with like scientific fact and science. And it just wasn't working. And it was creating so much stress in me that when I finally just let go of Christianity, it was just like this calm came over me. And I felt so much more peaceful and just, so much more a sense of identity and how it all worked. So it was the opposite. It was more like, okay, cool. Yeah. Everything feels normal now. And now I can start figuring out what I want to do with my life.
Yeah. Does that change the people around you when you make a big decision like that?
My parents may have been a little dismayed at the time, but not in a angry way or anything like that. And mostly just a lot of people who I knew, who I was friends with, many of them were on a similar path and having similar realizations. So it was just kind of a natural progression, I think, for a lot of us.
Okay. Because I wonder how many people that have the religion and then they're not teaching about the science, actual science. Like,
yeah.
And I wonder if that's changed.
I would guess
schools now.
That at Cairn University, it's still, I would guess that it's still pretty good. They're still teaching a 5,000-year-old Earth. If I had to guess, that's what I'd guess.
So I know you have the Tumblr, you're atheist. What's your name?
Atheist Guide to Christian Rock.
Okay, when did you start that?
I started it last year, and then I didn't get very far into it when I got this job, and I just knew working for Bandcamp, it was such a dream come true. Yeah. And I just knew that if I was going to do this, I wanted to give it 400% of my attention. So I stopped doing the Tumblr. But I started it last year just as a way. I felt like there were so many great records that were made in this weird subculture, and I was so worried that they were going to be lost to history. And I just felt, let me just write about these and get them out there. And, you know, not like I have a huge following or something, but just maybe if somebody Googles these bands one day, they'll find this, and that'll be a thing that exists in the world. And it was also for me to work through that whole period of my life and to go back to these records as a different person and see how I felt about them.
And what is the difference? When you listen to them now?
I still think they're amazing. So some of them I just still think are incredible. I think I pick up things. I'm impressed with how progressive and left-leaning they are, which I didn't realize at the time. There's a band called Adam Again who have a record called Dig, which is amazing. And it's a chronicle of the lead singer's divorce from another singer who was in the band. And it's full of lefty politics and, like, at the time, anti-Gulf War sentiment. There's another band called the Lost Dogs. They have an anti-gun song, like not even like a gun control song, just like
stop.
Yeah, stop with guns. If you tried to release that in Christianity today, people would go nuts. And I don't think I appreciated how much they were pushing what was considered acceptable at the time.
So I know I heard about you from eMusic initially. Yeah. I was sitting in Union Square Park, and there was some woman going by with free download cards.
Really?
Yes. And that was like my introduction to getting into digital music.
Nice.
And like from reading the website and like got turned on to so much stuff. And so I was wondering, like, how did you get into digital music and your path to eMusic?
Sure. Those early days of eMusic were fun.
Yeah.
I was working in a library, and I was doing writing on the side, and eMusic had posted that they were looking for a production editor, and it was being headed up by Michael Azarad and Yancey Strickler at the time. And it's just like almost 12 years ago. And I applied for the job, got the interview, spent a few weeks sweating, and miraculously got the job. And that was it. Like the full-time production editor gig at eMusic in like 2004 or 5 was my first experience with digital music. And it prepared me in a lot of ways. There's so many things. Being an editor for a digital music site is got its own sets of challenges. you learn about the way record labels work and about the way digital distribution works and territorial rights and how you negotiate these things. And in order to write about this deal needs to be worked out so we can ensure eMusic gets this record. And it was a real education. And it was also, working with Michael and Yancey was still more education on how to be a writer and editor. But yeah, eMusic was my first pathway into digital music.
How were you initially, before that, listening to music? What format?
CDs. Okay. I don't think I ever I was only like casually getting into iTunes at the time. And then when I found out about eMusic, it just catered a little more to what I was interested in. So I subscribed to eMusic, and that became my main source of digital music at the time.
See, I like the way there was the essays, and if you like this, because I don't like the now streaming sites where it's like the curation. Like, I'm the type of music listener where like I want to kind of do the work.
Sure, yeah.
And like you can read about it and then find out. And that's what I liked about eMusic and what was done there.
Yeah, I mean, and we try to do a similar thing at Bandcamp Daily as well. One of the things, there's so many things I love about Bandcamp, but one of them is that it's so easy for anyone, anywhere in the world to make an album in their bedroom and connect with fans and put it out for sale. I mean, that's incredible. And so that allows us to do so many fun pieces, just spotlighting these regional scenes. We did a piece on the emo revival in China last week, and one on Korean synth pop, and one on Ethiopiawi, which is like Ethiopian jazz plus electronic music. And it's just,
that's great.
All these things are all these things are happening just because of the ease of use of Bandcamp and people able to get their ideas out in the world. And so when you're on an editorial team, it's just fun. I mean, people pitch something and you're like, I didn't even know that was happening. Here, here's the things I'm looking for from this story. And you just find out about so many great artists that way.
How are you finding about the music for Bandcamp Daily? Like going to seeing who's making music? Is that how you find out stuff?
Yeah, it's
mainly?
a mix. Sometimes writers will pitch things. We have writers all over the world. So some of them will just know that this scene is happening in their area and that all of these bands are releasing music on Bandcamp. We all go to shows a lot, and that's how we find out about things. We can take a look. If you go to the front page of Bandcamp, there's best selling, and you can drill down by the Discover section. You can drill down by genre. So
that's how I get guests.
What's that?
I've gotten a lot of guests doing that.
It's fun. And like you go in there one day and there's an album in there that you've never seen before, never heard of before, and you listen to it, and if it's cool, you try to figure out what's going on there. So we really get ideas from a ton of different places.
Okay. And what is the goal sort of like people go to Bandcamp Daily and then go to buy the music or branch out from there?
Hopefully. Yeah. I mean, our goal is kind of twofold. It's artist and label focused. There's a lot of great labels who use Bandcamp too. So it's artist and label focused, where we want to bring attention to just artists and labels who are doing interesting things and who are worth paying attention to. And then the flip side of that is we want to hopefully turn people on to their next favorite record or their next favorite artist or a scene that they didn't know about. And, it's kind of like what you were saying before. We can do the emo in China scene and we can suggest 6 bands, but you get to band number 6 and you look at their album pages and you just click one of the tags and there's 25 others. We're just a gateway for people to hopefully discover all of these other bands and all this other music.
What do you say to people? Because I get this, there's no good music anymore. And I'm like, no, that's not true.
What do you say to that?
You know what I think it is? That there was a time when there was gatekeepers and you could kind of trust them, and you could just turn on the radio, turn on MTV, and you would be exposed to music. You didn't have to really do much work. And now, because anyone can release their music, you actually have to do a little work. And people are intimidated.
I totally agree. Yeah. I think that's a big part of it for sure. I also think nostalgia creeps in a little bit for people too, where just music from a certain period resonates with them, and they, for whatever reason, it's hard to move past that if you don't push yourself a little bit. So I think that's part of it. Yeah. people just have a lot of preconceived ideas about things. Yeah, it's tough. I don't know.
You don't have an answer? Because people would say that to you, right?
Yeah, they do. It depends on what kind of mood I'm in. Because sometimes you can see where the conversation's going, and it's just going to be somebody waxing nostalgic about the 1990s, and I just don't have a lot of patience for that. But if someone's really curious and really wants to know, you can kind of ask them, what was the last thing you heard that you really liked? Or even if it is from the 90s, what kind of music did you like then? Or what kinds of things in music do you get into? And usually they have at least 3 or 4 bands, even if it is the last thing they listened to was REM or something like that. And you can piece out a way through there to hopefully introduce them to some new things.
And I guess I'll just kind of ask you, like, what are some of your all-time favorite albums?
Oh man, favorite album of all time is the Go-Between 16 Lovers Lane.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, I think that record's so good. Life's Rich Pageant by REM, Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, masterpiece. I got really obsessed with Marvin Gaye for a while because of the religious background in his life and the tensions that he was going through, and I went in a real deep Marvin Gaye phase. Wu-Tang Clan, first Wu-Tang Clan record. I think almost everything they do, except for the most recent record, is phenomenal. Joy Division, Unknown Pleasures. An album called Sticks and Stones by a group called the 77s. Those are probably somewhere near the top for me.
And I'm curious, we're recording this and it's late October. We can say most of the year's over, right? Unless someone releases best surprise albums, which could happen. Some of your favorite albums of the year?
I mean, all over the map. There's a ton on Bandcamp. I mean, the obvious pick is I just listened to Beyonce's Lemonade nonstop when it came out. I just think that record is a pop masterpiece. There's a record by Shabaka and the Ancestors that are... It's funny. I was thinking about this the other day. Some of my favorite records of the year have been records that other members of our editorial staff have turned me on to. So our senior editor, Marcus J. Moore, turned me on to this record by Shabaka and the Ancestors, which is amazing. Deep spiritual psych jazz with these kind of hypnotic rhythms and vocals. I just love that thing to death. And then an album by a Scottish woman named Et called Homemade Lemonade. That's a record I played a ton. It's kind of like T-Rex by way of Carly Rae Jepsen.
Oh, that sounds good.
And our senior editor, Allie Jane, turned me on to that one. And then a record by More Mother Goddess called Fetish Bones, which our managing editor, Jess Skolnick, turned me on to. Man, I don't even know how to describe that thing. That's one of the... Have you heard it?
No, I haven't.
Oh, man. That is honestly just a record that you put on and it changes everything you think about how music can be. It just deconstructs the form completely, and there's noise elements and hip hop elements and drone elements and a strong political undercurrent. And Jess had been talking about it for a long time, and when I finally listened to it, I was angry at myself for having waited that long. So the Shabaka record, the Et Homemade Lemonade, and this More Mother are probably top 3 of the year for me.
Okay. And how do you avoid the whole nostalgic thing that the best music is behind you?
I mean, this is going to sound... I try not to be mean about this kind of stuff, but I'll just... You go on YouTube and you see the videos people are being... Especially with 90s nostalgia. And people talking about, the 90s were so much better.
No,
I think people forget that there's maybe only 3 good... rock bands that were on the radio in the 90s. Everyone, of course Nirvana was in the 90s, so everybody just associates it. But rock radio in the 90s, have we forgotten about Candlebox? And about the Spin Doctors? And Sponge? I mean,
the
music was bad. So I don't know. I feel like...
It's the first bad decade, I think.
Yeah, really bad. I mean, even 80s radio rock, because, 80s we had Madonna and Prince and Michael Jackson. And then you get to the 90s and it's like, I mean, I love Nirvana, but look at some of those playlists sometimes. Look at like the Billboard Top 100 from like 93. It is dark.
And I never thought about that like while I was in it. But like, like I'll go into Urban Outfitters and they're playing like 90s music. Or I go into the coffee shop, The Bean, and they'll play 90s music. I'm like, God, there was just a lot of bad music.
Oh, yeah.
Well, if you listen to 80s, there's like a lot of good music and a range.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. It was more, I mean, of course, the like 90s, obviously, the golden age of hip hop. So, I mean, a lot of what was going on in hip hop in the 90s.
But that ended, 92?
Yeah. But I mean, like, even people like Big L and Black Moon and Souls of Mischief. And I mean, that De La Soul, obviously, it's like late 80s, early 90s. I mean, that's great. But like rock radio in the 90s and rock in the 90s? Come on. How are people nostalgic for that?
I think if you were born in the 90s, then you love it because you have nothing attached to it.
You have no frame of reference for it.
So the question is, how do you not remain nostalgic?
Just some of that stuff. I mean, honestly, I think it's because even at the time, a lot of that stuff just set off my alarm bells. Like I remember driving around Long Island and listening to WDRE at the time. And it was like right after Nirvana had broken. And I distinctly remember hearing the first Stone Temple Pilots single, and my immediate reaction was, well, this is over. Like just never ever clicked with me. I just had the BS alarm go off. I mean, I think I'm still nostalgic for maybe the early days of indie rock when things were a little bit noisier and more abrasive. But maybe the thing that keeps me from being nostalgic is there's so much good music coming out now. It's like I had great moments with these records 20 years ago, but if I spend all my time, if I can spend all my time listening to that, I'm going to miss records like the More Mother record. And why would I do that?
If everyone would feel the same.
How do you do it? How do you keep off nostalgia?
I'm not a nostalgic person. And so I think that's probably naturally. And I like the fact that there's so much music in the world and I'm never going to hear all of it.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to keep searching.
Exactly. Yeah. I was talking to somebody about this the other night about people who are maybe in their 20s now. When I was in my 20s and growing up, it was like the late 80s. So I had 20-ish years of music to catch up on, really, like the 60s. You can catch up on that. And then you can have a krautrock phase, and you can get really into Afrobeat. You can get really into minimal wave. Like you can have this, but people in their 20s now, it's like 50 years of recorded music to catch up on. I don't...
You kind of need a guide.
Yeah, I don't know how you even start.
Yeah, you need someone.
Yeah.
To like turn you on to it.
Yeah, and enter Bandcamp Daily.
Yes, there you go. So I guess I leave Bandcamp Daily with bandcampdaily.com?
Daily.bandcamp.com.
Daily, okay.
Cool. Yeah, and we we'll have an album of the day every day. If people just they only have 10 minutes and they just want to see what the main record they should pay attention to today is, just check out album of the day. Okay. And then we publish 3 to 4 interviews, features, lists, those regional scene reports every single day. And there's always, they don't even have to, you can just go to bandcamp.com and it's right front and center and people can find it there. And of course, Twitter and Facebook and all that. But I love working with this editorial team and I love working for Bandcamp and I love just it is like, it's a remedy for nostalgia. Yeah. Just tons and tons of great music every single day on the site that we just get to try to sort out and show to people.
You see this as the future of how music will be digested?
In what regard?
I guess the labels eventually will go away.
I don't know about that. I think that tons of record labels, great record labels, use Bandcamp. Sacred Bones, Secretly Canadian. And I still, my wife works for a record label. Mm-hmm. I still think that there's a place for labels. But here's a great example of ways they can work together even. I mean, Car Seat Headrest, who was just signed to Matador, started on Bandcamp. Yeah. Frankie Cosmos, who just signed to Bayonet, had 20-something albums on Bandcamp before she got signed. So, I mean, I think it can be both and. Yeah. I don't think it needs to be either or.
Okay, it can complement each other.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And for people to keep in touch with you online?
They can follow me at Keyscore on Twitter, KEYESCORE. Or they can follow Bandcamp on Twitter. It's just at Bandcamp. They can like Bandcamp on Facebook. And they can just read Bandcamp Daily every day. And we're all writing for it. And hopefully they can find things to keep them from listening to Candlebox.
And that sounds like an ending. J. Edward Keys here on Talk Music Talk. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed talking to him. Always a pleasure to chat with fellow music lovers. Make sure you head on over to Bandcamp Daily, daily.bandcamp.com or bandcamp.com to support indie artists making great music. Joe said he's on Twitter, Keyscore. Don't forget that, KEYESCORE. As for me, I am online several places, several ways. TalkMusicTalk.com for more information on the podcast, or thisisboice.com to check out my music and my books. I write novels and I make music. And if you are on Twitter or Instagram, follow me there at thisisboice. Don't forget the call to action. Please share the show on social media. Take the survey, talkmusictalk.com/survey. And don't forget to download the Talk Music Talk free app wherever you get your apps for iPhone and Android, or subscribe to the podcast on Google Play or iTunes. And whatever you do, wherever you listen, make sure you leave a rating and or review to increase the ranking of the show. I have a back catalog suggestion for you. Early Fave, episode number 5 with Jack Lucy. She calls her music urban folk, an amazing performer. She performs a TMT exclusive that you will not hear anywhere else in this version. Great conversation about overcoming setbacks on your path to your dreams. Check it out, episode number 5 with Jack Lucy. Thank you so much for listening. Till next time, and there will be a next time. This one's for you, Liz.